In this video, we're going to take a look at a few extensions that I find very useful. They've recently come up in discussions with students, and I thought maybe it would be a good thing to go over these. The first one is called Fredo Corner, and it's a sort of a new version of his older round corner. If you've been using that one, I would suggest that you add Fredo Corner to your collection. Don't get rid of round corner because they do some things differently, and sometimes you might want round corner instead. And I'll give you a couple of examples of things that you can do with Fredo Corner that's kind of neat. Here I've got a model I did of Tay Frid's dining chair. And one of the things that I find kind of neat about Fredo Corner is an option to change the shape of the rounding instead of just a simple circular curve. So for example, here I have a seat cushion, and I'm going to just double click and select the top edge. I'm not going to round the bottom edge, but I've got all of that rounded, or all of that selected there. And I'm going to choose round. And right now it's telling me that the 2-inch radius that I have set is too large for this. Let me move those out of the way so we can see what we've got here. It is too large for the thing because my seat cushion isn't deep enough. So let me set that to, let's try a 1/2 inch. There we go. So the green lines are showing the limits of the rounding over. And right now I happen to have this set to create a Bezier curve for the round over. If I click here and choose, typically you'd have a circle, but you could have a Bezier or a squircle. I don't exactly know the definition of that, but there's controls so that you can change the shape of these things. This one will actually even go outside of the perimeter of the thing that you're rounding. I'm not quite sure when you'd want that, but that's an option. So you can do that in little tabs here. There's controls up here for the type of rounding or the way the edges are handled and that sort of thing. Here's an added thing that's kind of neat. I'm going to double click on one of the green lines, and that selects all of them. And currently the offset is set to that 1/2 inch. Down in the lower right corner, the measurements window is showing white, and it's ready for input. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make the rounding go farther in on the top than it does on the bottom, on the sides. And so in this case, I think what I'll do is I'll take, like, I'm just pulling this out of the air, 125, and you see it's moved the green lines on the top in, but the ones around the side are not moved. So now if I click here and I get that green check mark, I can click, and if I zoom in here, you see how it's made this round over more like you'd, if it was a piece of wood, you maybe would use a thumbnail type cutter and router or shaper to create that shape. In any case, that's kind of a neat thing that you have that control. Let's go over and look. So imagine this is a round tabletop and you want to put a bevel on it, and I'm just going to put it on the top because it's easier to see, but we can do a similar sort of a thing with the green bevel tool. So here again, I've got a 1/2 inch offset, but if I double click on that green edge there, I can change that. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to go back here. I'm just going to click out of that. I'm going to put in a 1/4 inch offset instead. I don't want to go quite as deep. And let's say I wanted a 15-degree bevel on there. So I did the figuring, and I can put in a 15/16 offset and click. Now there I've left it so that it doesn't soften the edges. I can just quickly do the softening, but I wanted you to see that edge. In fact, I'm going to undo my softening. So you can see that I've got this 15-degree bevel on there. So that's kind of a neat thing. Another neat feature here is an option to repair or undo the rounding over. So, and this comes up quite a lot for me. People are asking, well, I rounded this edge over, but now I don't want it rounded over. How do I fix that? And there's an undo feature or repair feature. And so I've got this rail open for editing. I rounded that front bottom edge over when I created this model, and if I click on that and then come down here and hover over that surface, you can see it redraws the sharp corner there, and it even shows me when I rounded this over. So I did that on the 4th of April. I'm recording this on the 28th of April. So even going back in time quite a bit, you can fix it, and you just click and choose undo, and it's done. And I'll click undo again because I want to keep that radius. Another tool while we're looking at the chair, this is a different extension, is called Enerot Auto Weld. And by the way, I'll have links to these in the blog post. Enerot Auto Weld will go through selected geometry and weld everything it can. And it's nice to have curves and things welded. One of the ways you can see that they aren't is with, or tell whether they are or aren't, is by turning on endpoints in the style. So here I have endpoints turned on for this style, and so you see all these little dots along the edges. So to run this, I triple clicked on the geometry there on the component and opened the component for editing and selected all of that geometry. And then I'm just going to click on weld and let it run. And when it finishes, it's cleaned all of that up except for one right in there. I'm not quite sure why that one isn't. The dot is there because that's welded into a single curve, but I normally only use that the endpoints as a sort of a diagnostic thing. You can see here I've got that same issue, and I can select this and run auto weld, and that takes care of it. So then I can turn off my endpoints and they go away. Auto weld will also weld the edges of a profile after Follow Me has been run on it. And so if you're going to reuse, say, a molding profile, typically you'll find that Follow Me will explode any curves in that profile. Auto weld will weld them back together automatically, and it's just done in the background, so you don't even see that. One of the reasons that I also like auto weld a lot is actually, let's go back to styles. I use a lot of sketchy styles, and if I undo the weld, in fact, I'm going to undo both welds. Let's see. Undo weld edges. So all the edges are broken because they're not welded together. And here on the top of the leg, even some of the edges drop out because they're too short for the style. So if I select all of this and choose auto weld, let's see, I get my nice curves going around, and do the same thing here. And those curves weren't so short, but now those show as continuous lines instead of little short line segments. So if you use sketchy styles in your modeling, this is nice to have. It's not a free one, but the time it can save you screwing around with trying to get things put back together or fixing exploded curves is easily pays for that. All right, let's switch to another model, and I'm going to show you another one of Fredo's extensions. This is a new one. It's sort of a replacement for his Bezier spline tools. It's got a nice small toolbar. Actually, I better pull that down because I'll have a panel here. And well, let's just click on this, and you can see that it opens up a toolbar, which is typical of his extensions. And you can choose the kind of curve that you want. So classic Bezier, that's one of my favorites. Local fit spline, that would be like a Catmull spline, where a Bezier spline, the curve does not go through the control points, and the local fit spline, the control points lie on the curve. There's a number of other options here. I'm not going to go into all of them. I'll post a link to this extension, and there's a video in the link that will show more. But let me just show you a real quick couple of neat things here. I'm going to assume we want to put a curved top to this rail. So let's say I want to come up 2 inches, and I'll just put a guideline over here for the center. I'm only going to draw half of this, and I'm going to use a classic Bezier curve. You can choose the start and end sequence. I like to start with the first, then the last, and then add additional points, but you can do them in sequence instead. So if you want to go from the first point to the second to the third to the fourth and then to the final one, you can do it that way. You can also choose to generate the curve inside a group or not in a group or a component. It's going to just be in the current context. And there's a bunch of other things about how you can change things. The other thing that's really nice is the ability to set a plane that the curve will be drawn in. So some people have trouble keeping Bezier curves on plane when they're modeling, and this gives you that option. I'm not going to use those here because I don't really need to do that because I've got the face to draw on, but I'm going to start with a point there and here, and I'm just going to drag a point out here someplace and just putting it on that guideline. And there aren't very many segments there, so it's kind of a rough curve. So I'm going to increase the smoothness of that. Let's say 48. I'll just type 48S. This is the same as in the old version. And smooth that curve out. Now, he's added a neat little widget here that does a couple of things. One of them, of course, you grab the orange plus icon, it becomes a dot, and you can move that curve where you want, or that control point where you want it to be. But another thing that you can do is hover over the green dot, you click on that, and you get a little slider, and you can adjust the weight of that point, how hard that's actually pulling on the curve. So you can change the shape of the curve. In the old days, that would take a bunch more control points just to get that generated. So you can play with that, and I bring this over here, for example, and then so we have a lot more flexibility in the way we lay out a curve without having to have a whole lot of control points. The other thing that you get here is adding a cusp, which is basically makes the curve, and this doesn't change anything then, it drags the curve to the control point. And so you can have some parts of the curve go through control points and some not. You can choose the other curves as well. But I think that's going to offer a lot of options for creating new curves that maybe you didn't have before, and or were harder to create. Of course, now here I've only drawn this for half of this, so what I'm going to do, and it did make it as a group, I'm going to come up here to the top and copy that to the opposite side, and then I'm going to select both of those and explode them, because then I can just push the waste away, and we'll soften that little edge right there, and erase our guidelines, and we have a curve. I don't know whether that certainly doesn't work on this bed very well, but it was a bed model. Anyway, hopefully between Freddo Corner, Freddo Spline, and Enerot Auto Weld, you should be able to come up with some nice tools to improve your modeling. Anyway, stay safe out there. Until next time, take care.